Please, just for a moment, close your eyes. Try to reach back into the depths of your memory. Can you hear it? That distant, melancholic echo of the tofu seller blowing his brass horn as the evening sun dipped below the rooftops. Can you smell the sharp, comforting scent of mosquito coils burning on a humid summer night? Welcome back to the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Today, we are going to take a gentle walk down memory lane to revisit 20 beautiful, everyday things from vintage Japan that have quietly vanished from our modern world. We will rediscover the magic of our childhoods, the warmth of our communities, and the simple objects that held so much soul. And please, stay with us until the very end, because the final memory we will share is perhaps the most touching. A beautiful evening ritual of absolute safety and love that truly defined our youth, and one that will surely bring a warm tear to your eye. Before we begin our journey, let us remember how time used to feel. Time flowed differently back then. It was slower, richer, and entirely without the frantic rushing that consumes our days now. In the Showa era, we did not have instant gratification at our fingertips. We had to wait. We waited for our favorite song to play on the radio. We waited weeks for a handwritten letter to arrive in the mail. We waited for the seasons to change to eat our favorite foods. And in that waiting, there was a profound beauty. Some people today might look back and think that without modern technology, our lives were somehow poorer or more difficult. But those of us who lived it know the absolute truth. Life was vastly richer in sincerity. Because we did not have screens to look at, we looked at each other. We relied on our neighbors, our shopkeepers, and our families. Our joy did not come from endless digital feeds, but from the weight of a 10-yen coin in our pocket, the shared warmth of a small wooden table, and the undeniable feeling that we were all truly connected. Now let us remember the magical world of the Dagashiya, the neighborhood penny candy store. For a child in the 1970s, this tiny, slightly dusty shop was the absolute center of the universe. Do you remember the elderly man or woman who sat patiently behind the rough wooden counter? They knew every child by name. The air inside smelled wonderfully of sweet soy sauce, dried squid, and sugary plum candies. We would walk in clutching a single 10-yen or 50-yen coin, feeling the heavy metal in our small, sweaty palms. Choosing what to buy was the most important decision of our day. We stared at the rows of glass jars filled with colorful, artificially flavored sweets, calculating exactly how far our tiny allowance could go. This was not just a store. It was our very first lesson in economics and our first real taste of independence. We would sit on the wooden bench outside, comparing our treasures, trading stickers, and playing simple games in the dirt until the streetlights began to flicker on. Today, these beautiful, chaotic little shops have been replaced by bright, sterile convenience stores where nobody knows who you are, and that unique feeling of childhood wonder has been lost forever. And what about the heavy red rotary public telephones, known affectionately as the aka denwa? Sitting right outside the local tobacco shop or the train station, they were our only lifelines to the outside world. Do you recall the tactile sensation of placing your finger into the plastic dial, pulling it all the way around, and hearing that distinct, mechanical ticking sound as it spun back into place? We had to memorize the phone numbers of our friends and family by heart. When we dropped our 10-yen coin into the slot, it made a heavy, echoing clunk. And then came the anxiety. You had exactly 3 minutes to say everything that mattered. If you were calling a boy or a girl you liked, your heart would pound, praying that their stern father would not be the one to answer the receiver. There was no caller identification, no texting to say you were going to call. It required courage. When the warning tone beeped, telling you your time was almost up, you had to speak frantically, rushing to say goodbye before the line went dead. That urgency made every single word spoken through that heavy black receiver feel incredibly important and precious. Let us think back to the rhythmic, comforting sounds of the street vendors, especially the tofu seller at dusk. Long before giant supermarkets sold everything wrapped in cold plastic, food came to our neighborhoods with a song. As the afternoon turned into evening, the beautiful, melancholic notes of the wrapper, a small brass horn, would echo down the narrow streets. Pa-poo. It was the signal that dinner was approaching. Mothers would hand us a ceramic bowl and send us running out the front door. We would stand by the vendor's wooden cart or bicycle. The tofu was kept in deep basins of freezing cold, crystal clear water. The vendor would expertly slice a perfectly square block, gently scoop it up, and place it right into our bowl. You could smell the fresh, earthy scent of the soybeans. It was a time for neighbors to gather in the street, exchange the local news, and complain about the summer heat or the winter chill. That simple transaction was filled with trust and human warmth, a daily community ritual that nourished both our bodies and our souls, completely erased by the silent aisles of modern grocery stores. Do you remember the absolute thrill of the kamishibai, the traditional paper theatre storyteller on his bicycle? This was our television before we had televisions. We would hear the sharp, loud clacking of his wooden blocks echoing through the neighborhood, signaling that a story was about to begin. Children would drop whatever they were doing and sprint toward the park. The storyteller had a wooden stage strapped to the back of his bicycle. To get a good spot at the front, you had to buy a cheap piece of candy from him. Then, he would slide beautiful hand-painted cardboard pictures into the wooden frame, changing them as he used his dramatic, booming voice to tell tales of brave heroes, ghosts, and funny animals. We sat on the ground, entirely mesmerized by the suspense. When he reached the most exciting cliffhanger, he would suddenly stop, pack up his stage, and tell us we had to come back tomorrow to find out what happened next. It was a communal imagination, a shared excitement that bound all the neighborhood children together in a way that watching a screen alone in a quiet room never could. Let us revisit the quiet magic of the early morning milk delivery. In the 1960s and 70s, waking up was accompanied by a very specific symphony. It was the delicate clinking of thick glass bottles against a wooden delivery box mounted right next to our front doors. When you stepped out into the crisp morning air, there it was, fresh milk waiting for you. The glass bottles were heavy and cold to the touch. Do you remember the little paper cap sealed over the top? We had a special, tiny tool with a sharp needle to pierce that thick paper hood and carefully lift it off. If you were lucky, there was a rich, thick layer of cream clinging to the bottom of the paper cap, and we would eagerly lick it off before anyone else could. Drinking milk from that heavy glass bottle simply tasted better, purer, and more alive than anything poured from a modern cardboard carton. And when you were finished, you washed the bottle and placed it back in the wooden box, a perfect, sustainable cycle of trust between your family and the delivery man, who worked silently while the rest of the world slept. Think back to the monumental physical effort required to do laundry with a double-roller, hand-cranked washing machine. Today, we simply press a button and walk away. But in those days, washing clothes was a true event. The machine was a large, round metal or plastic tub. It smelled intensely of strong, powdery soap. But the most unforgettable part was the wringer attached to the top. After the clothes had been washed, you had to carefully feed each heavy, soaking wet garment between two hard rubber rollers. You grabbed the iron handle and turned it with all your might. The water would squeeze out in a waterfall, and the clothes would emerge flattened like cardboard on the other side. You had to be so careful not to get your fingers caught or to accidentally crush a beautiful shell button. It was hard, exhausting work, often done outside in the humid summer air or the freezing winter wind. But doing the laundry together, taking turns turning the heavy crank and hanging the perfectly pressed clothes on bamboo poles to dry in the bright sun, gave us a profound sense of accomplishment and pride in caring for our homes. Now let us remember the incredible rhythmic music of the kipu-kiri, the manual ticket punchers at the train stations. Before automatic gates and plastic smart cards, catching a train meant passing through the hands of a true artist. The station attendant stood in a tiny wooden booth at the ticket gate, holding a heavy metal hole puncher. As hundreds of commuters rushed past, the attendant would take your small, stiff cardboard ticket and punch a tiny hole in it in a fraction of a second. But it was the sound that was unforgettable. To keep the rhythm and prevent their hands from cramping, they would constantly click the puncher against the metal plate. Cha-cha-cha, click-click. It was a lightning-fast, metallic melody that echoed through every station in the country. If you looked down, the floor of the booth was covered in thousands of tiny, colourful confetti circles punched from the tickets. You handed your ticket to a human being. They looked at you, and they let you through. It was a brief moment of eye contact in a busy morning, a touch of humanity that made the massive railway system feel surprisingly personal. Can you still smell the earthy, smoky fragrance of the katori senko, the traditional mosquito coils burning on a hot summer night? In the humid summers of the 1970s, air conditioning was a rare luxury. Instead, we opened all the windows, letting the night breeze flow through the house. To keep the mosquitoes away, we used those beautiful deep green spirals of incense. We would carefully break 2 interlocking coils apart, trying not to snap the fragile ends. We lit the tip with a match, watching the small flame die down to a glowing orange ember. Often, we placed the coil inside a charming ceramic pig called a kayari buta. The thick white smoke would drift lazily out of the pig's snout, filling the tatami room with a scent that was sharp, slightly medicinal, and utterly comforting. We would lie on the floor in our cotton summer kimonos, listening to the buzzing of cicadas outside and the gentle ringing of the wind chime in the breeze. That glowing red dot in the dark room was our silent guardian, watching over our sleep in a time when we lived in true harmony with the natural world outside our open doors. Let us recall the chaotic, joyous ritual of creating our own New Year's greeting cards using a print gokko machine. In the 1980s, preparing the nengajo was an event that consumed the entire family for weeks in December. Before digital printers and instant messages, we made our cards by hand using this miraculous little device. Do you remember the blinding flash of the flashbulbs when you pressed the handle down? It literally burned your hand-drawn image into a master screen. The room would suddenly smell of burnt flashbulbs and thick, sticky ink. We would carefully squeeze tubes of colourful ink onto the master, place a blank postcard underneath, and press down. Each card had to be peeled away slowly and laid out carefully on every available surface in the living room to dry. You could not walk anywhere without stepping over rows of drying postcards. We spent hours writing personal messages to every single friend, relative, and teacher. It was messy, time-consuming, and sometimes frustrating. But the act of physically pressing our wishes for the new year onto paper gave those cards a soul that no digital text message could ever possess. Think of the absolute joy and community spirit of the Sento, the neighborhood public bathhouse. Before every home had its own modern bathtub, the evening trip to the Sento was a vital part of daily life. We would walk down the street in the evening, carrying a plastic basin that rattled with our soap, a washcloth, and a bottle of shampoo. Stepping through the sliding doors, the air was thick with warm steam and the scent of floral soap. You would enter the vast bathing room with its incredibly high ceilings, where the sounds of splashing water and echoing voices created a comforting roar. We scrubbed each other's backs, a true act of familial love. And as you soaked in the painfully hot, deep-tiled tub, you would gaze up at the magnificent, hand-painted mural of Mount Fuji on the wall. The Sento was where all social barriers melted away. Young and old, rich and poor, everyone bathed together, sharing gossip and laughter. And the absolute best part, coming out, completely warmed to the bone, and drinking a freezing cold bottle of sweet fruit milk or coffee milk, standing with one hand on your hip. It was pure paradise. Now let us remember the extreme dedication required to record our favorite music onto cassette tapes from the radio. In the 1980s, if you wanted to listen to a song, you could not just search for it on a computer. You had to hunt for it. We would sit on the floor for hours, staring intensely at our heavy silver boomboxes, listening to the FM radio station. We had a blank cassette tape perfectly queued up, our fingers resting lightly on the record and play buttons. The tension was unbearable. When you finally heard the opening notes of the song you wanted, you had to press both buttons down simultaneously with a loud, satisfying mechanical clunk. We held our breath, praying that the radio disc jockey would not speak over the ending of the song. If they did, you had to rewind and wait all over again. We painstakingly created our own mixtapes, handwriting the track lists on the tiny cardboard inserts with our neatest handwriting. When you gave a mixtape to a friend or someone you loved, you were giving them hours of your time, your patience and your heart, captured on a fragile ribbon of magnetic tape. Do you remember the sudden, exhilarating disruption of the Chindonya, the brightly dressed street advertising musicians? On a quiet, boring weekday afternoon, you would suddenly hear it in the distance. The loud crashing of cymbals, the beating of a drum, and the sharp notes of a clarinet. We would drop our toys and rush to the front window or run out into the street. Down the road came a small parade of performers wearing exaggerated, colorful traditional kimonos, their faces painted stark white with bright red lips. One carried a large drum strapped to his back, striking it with incredible energy. They were hired to advertise a new shop opening or a special sale, handing out little paper flyers. But to us children, they looked like magical beings who had stepped out of a fairy tale. They brought noise, color, and absolute chaos to our quiet neighborhoods. We would follow them down the street, completely entranced by the spectacle. Today, advertisements are just annoying pop-ups on a glowing screen. But back then, an advertisement was a beautiful, live performance that made the whole street come alive with laughter and music. Let us think back to the majestic presence of the vacuum tube television in the corner of the living room. Before flat screens that mount invisibly onto walls, the television was a monumental piece of heavy wooden furniture. It had 4 sturdy legs and often sliding wooden doors to cover the precious glass screen when it was not in use. Turning it on was an exercise in patience. You twisted the heavy knob and it made a loud snap. Then you waited. Slowly, the vacuum tubes inside would warm up. First came the sound, full of static, and then a small horizontal line of light would appear in the center of the dark screen, gradually expanding until the black and white image finally flickered into view. Changing the channel meant physically getting up and turning a large, stiff rotary dial that clicked heavily into place for every single station. We did not have hundreds of channels, we only had a few. So the entire family had to compromise. We gathered around this glowing piece of furniture, sitting on the tatami, sharing mandarin oranges and watching exactly the same program together. The television did not isolate us in separate rooms. It physically brought the family together in one space. Can you remember the intense, comforting heat and the wonderful smells of the kerosene heater in the dead of winter? Japanese houses in the Showa era were famously drafty and freezing cold in January. The absolute savior was the metal kerosene stove placed right in the middle of the room. Filling it was a messy job, and the sharp chemical smell of the kerosene would quickly fill the entryway. But when you struck the match and lit the wick, the heater would glow with a beautiful, deep orange light that radiated an intense, dry heat. We would huddle as close to it as our parents would allow, warming our freezing hands and toes. But the greatest joy was what we put on top. Mothers would often place a heavy kettle of water on the flat metal top to keep the air humid, gently whistling all evening. And if we were very lucky, she would wrap sweet potatoes in aluminium foil and place them right on the heater. The entire house would slowly fill with the incredible, sweet, caramelizing scent of the roasting potato. Peeling back that foil and eating the steaming, golden potato on a freezing night was a comfort so deep it warmed our very souls. Now let us remember the chabudai, the low, round wooden dining table that was the beating heart of the family home. We did not sit on high chairs at isolated islands. We sat on flat, square cushions directly on the soft tatami floor. The chabudai was small, meaning our knees were practically touching our siblings and parents. When dinner was served, all the plates and bowls were crowded onto this tiny surface. We shared a single pot of rice, a single simmering hot pot, leaning over the table together. Because we were physically so close, conversation was inevitable. We could see every expression on our parents' faces. If you misbehaved, your father did not have to shout. A simple, stern look from across the narrow table was enough. And when the meal was finished, the beauty of the chabudai was revealed. We simply folded its 4 short legs inward, picked it up, and moved it to the corner of the room. The dine-in room instantly transformed into a spacious bedroom, ready for the thick cotton futons to be rolled out. It taught us how to share space, how to live closely with one another, and how a family thrives on genuine closeness. Think back to the great, exhausting ritual of the seasonal deep cleaning, especially the beating of the tatami mats. When spring finally arrived, shaking off the winter dampness, the entire neighborhood would engage in this massive chore. Men would lift the heavy, woven straw mats right out of the floorboards and carry them outside into the bright sunshine. They would prop them up against the walls of the house. Then came the sound. Whack, whack, whack. Using a special tool made of bound bamboo, people would furiously beat the tatami mats to knock out a year's worth of deep dust. The sound echoed down every street like distant fireworks. We children would stand back and watch in awe as massive clouds of dust sparkled in the sunlight. Leaving the mats in the sun naturally disinfected them, and when they were finally carried back inside and laid perfectly into place, the entire house smelled unbelievably fresh, like dried grass and pure sunshine. It was incredibly hard labor, but that evening, lying on the freshly cleaned, sweet-smelling tatami floor, you felt a profound sense of renewal and absolute peace in your home. Let us revisit the elegant, disappearing art of the furoshiki, the simple square of cloth that could wrap absolutely anything. Long before plastic bags choked our oceans, we carried our belongings in beautiful pieces of fabric. Do you remember watching your mother or grandmother expertly fold and tie a furoshiki? It was like magic. With a few deft twists and a tight double knot, a simple square of cotton or silk transformed into a secure handle for a bento box, a protective cover for a fragile bottle, or a carrying sack for our school supplies. The fabrics were adorned with beautiful traditional patterns, deep indigo dyes, or flying cranes. Learning to tie the knots correctly was a rite of passage, a skill passed down from generation to generation. When you arrived at your destination and untied the cloth, it did not go into the trash. It was carefully folded into a tiny, neat square and slipped back into a pocket, ready to be used 1,000 more times. The furoshiki taught us respect for our belongings, patience in our actions, and an effortless, everyday beauty that modern, disposable convenience has completely erased from our lives. Can you feel the immense weight of the randoseru, the genuine leather backpack, on your tiny shoulders on the first day of elementary school? In the Showa era, these bags were incredibly expensive and almost always made of thick, stiff cowhide. For boys, it was jet black. For girls, it was deep red. When it was brand new, The leather was so stiff it actually hurt our shoulders, and it smelled wonderfully rich and earthy. The brass buckles were heavy and cold. It felt like carrying a turtle shell on our backs. But over the next 6 years, that bag became a part of us. The leather softened, molding perfectly to our growing bodies. It accumulated scratches, scuffs, and deep creases, each one telling a story of a scraped knee, a race home in the rain, or a tumble in the dirt. It was tough enough to be used as a cushion when sitting on the ground, or even a shield in a snowball fight. When we finally graduated, that heavy leather bag was battered and worn, yet undeniably beautiful. It was an object built to last through our entire childhood, teaching us the profound value of taking care of something precious over many years. Now let us remember the agonizing, beautiful wait for a handwritten letter to arrive. Before the instant ping of digital emails, communication required time, effort, and real physical materials. We would sit at a desk, unscrew the cap of a heavy fountain pen, and carefully spread out a sheet of textured washi paper. The pen would scratch softly against the fibers of the paper. We had to think deeply about our words, because we could not simply hit backspace to erase a mistake. We poured our emotions into the ink. We carefully folded the paper, placed it in an envelope, chose a beautiful stamp, and walked to the red post box on the corner. And then we waited. For weeks we would run to the mailbox every afternoon, hoping for a reply. When the letter finally arrived, it was a treasure. You could recognize the handwriting immediately. You could trace the pressure of their pen, see where the ink had smudged slightly, and physically touch the very paper that their hands had touched miles away. A handwritten letter held the actual essence of the person sending it, making the long wait totally worth the overwhelming joy of tearing open the envelope. Finally, let us remember the evening chorus of the neighborhood, the most comforting ritual of all. In the 1970s, children played outside freely, roaming the streets, alleys, and parks without adult supervision. The streets belonged to us. But as the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows, a shift would happen. You would begin to smell the distinct, mouth-watering aromas of dinner drifting from the open windows of the houses. The smell of grilling fish, simmering miso soup, and sweet soy sauce. And then the voices began. One by one, mothers would lean out of their windows or stand at their front gates, calling out the names of their children. Kenji! Yuko! Time for dinner! The names echoed down the narrow streets, a chorus of love and safety. You would shout back, grab your bicycle, and race home through the twilight. There was an invisible net of absolute security, knowing that every neighbor was watching out for you, and that a warm meal and a loving family were waiting just inside the sliding door. It is this profound feeling of community, safety, and deep belonging that we miss the most. As we look back at these 20 memories, it becomes clear that we do not just miss the physical objects. We do not just miss the heavy red telephones or the thick glass milk bottles. What we truly miss is who we were when we used them. We miss the slow pace of life, the deep trust in our neighbors, and the undeniable warmth of a world that required us to look each other in the eye. We miss our youth and the beautiful, simple magic of a time that has slipped through our fingers forever. Thank you so very much for taking this gentle walk down memory lane with me today. If these memories brought a warm smile to your face, please gently press the like button and subscribe to our channel so we can continue to share these beautiful journeys into the past together. Now, I would love to hear from you. Which of these 20 forgotten things sparked the strongest memory for you? Or is there another precious ritual from your childhood that we did not mention today? Please leave your personal story in the comments below. We read every single one. Until we meet again, please take good care of yourself and cherish your beautiful memories.